We are now here with...
Bart Groothuis, Member of European Parliament from the Netherlands.
And what do you do, Bart?
Well, I'm an MEP working on digital legislation and mainly also visualizing the unseen threat and making sure we protect ourselves better against it while taking all the chances we can get in Brussels to grow for prosperity and stability.
So you're a politician?
Yes, I'm a politician.
And can you give us an example of a day in your life? What have you been doing today up until this moment?
Well, now we're campaigning for the European elections on June 6th. Vote. Very important that you vote, wherever you are in Europe. But now campaigning is very different from an ordinary day. Usually I make laws, I make legislation. So I negotiate with all people in Europe to make sure we get legislation through that makes us prosperous and more safe.
Can you tell us a bit more about these laws and legislations that you're working on? There's NIS2. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Well, sure. It's the flagship European cybersecurity legislation, and I was the main negotiator for that. But we also negotiated, for example, the European Chips Act to get semiconductor industry back to Europe, not just leaving it up to our adversaries like China, but making sure we guarantee prosperity and safety for ourselves. We make all sorts of digital legislation, and I love it.
Can you tell us more about NIS2 specifically?
Yeah.
What are the advantages?
Well, the main thing is the threats against, the digital threats against institutions, not just hospitals and energy and water and telco, but also ordinary companies are growing very, very rapidly and very fast. It's ransomware, it's espionage, and what we're trying to do is make sure we get more resilient in Europe as such. Very important. Less hacks, less cyber incidents, better place to do business and to work.
I did some background research, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it true that now people working in companies, so the heads of management, for example, in companies will be liable now for cybersecurity? Can you explain that in a bit more detail, please?
That's totally true, because we've been speaking about making it, in good German, Chefsache, but making it C-level, making it into the boardroom. Cybersecurity, not letting it to some technicians somewhere in the back of your company. No, making it a board issue. And we've been discussing that for 15 years. Nothing really happened. What we're trying to do now is making CEOs personally liable. You shall and thou shall be aware of the IT and get a grip on it. That's what the main reason of this legislation is. That's the purpose we give into it.
How do you go from conceptualizing such ideas and legislations to where you are now?
Well, we first start with an idea at the European Commission, and then European Parliament takes hold of the grip of the legislation, and the 27 member states. It used to be 28, we still miss the UK. You're always welcome to rejoin, but 27 member states. And what I did from the Parliament, I was the chief negotiator. And we started making sure that this legislation works, not just for businesses, but especially for the people inside the cybersecurity community. I was director for cybersecurity at the Dutch Ministry of Defense before I joined the European Parliament. And it's that community of nerds, in the best sense of the words, real technicians working for our security. If we enable them with good legislation, we make sure that we keep safe as well.
Can you tell me more about the implementation of the legislation? So the European Parliament sets a law for the entire area, and each country then decides in its own terms how it does that?
So what we did is set a deadline for member states to make sure this legislation is in place. It is October 2024. Some of the member states are reluctant to put that forward, and they are not set to get to reach that goal in 2024 already, and they are postponing, among which my own member state, the Netherlands. I'm worried about that. I was in Ukraine with the 1-year anniversary of the war, and I asked the people from the Rada, my colleagues, the parliamentarians there, I said, what laws are you working on? And they said, well, the most important law we're working on is translating the NIS2 into Ukrainian legislation. This is the piece of legislation that makes Ukraine still going through it, still keeping strong, also digital. The Russians are trying anything to get us down, but we will not. They will not succeed. Because of pieces of legislation like the NIS2, they are copying it very good.
What are the overarching challenges when implementing such new laws across Europe?
Well, the main thing is if you have a business in Romania and also in Italy and in the Netherlands and you have a cybersecurity incident, it should be treated accordingly and harmonized across Europe. That's the challenge that we have as guardians of the European internal market. So the basis, the legal basis of this law is not a security provision in the treaties, it's the functioning of the internal market. making sure we get a level playing field. Just to be sure, we had Moody's, the credit rating agency, very important from the credit crisis, we all know them. They looked at this piece of legislation, the NIS2, you know what they said? It's credit positive for doing business in Europe. So it gets businesses into Europe because you're in grip, in control, also for business continuity reasons. A hack can always occur. Ransomware can always knock on your door. But whenever it happens, with this legislation, you're back in control, you're in power. You can always make sure that the service to the citizens continue. This is what it's at. This is what it's at.
How does this legislation set Europe apart from other regions around the world?
Well, what we see is that European businesses invest about 42% less in cybersecurity than in the US, for example, and it's a waterbed effect. So if the US starts raising the bar and building resilience, the hackers flow towards Europe. We don't want that, and we want to raise our resilience as well. So this is what is happening right now. What we see now is that last summer, India all of a sudden came with new cybersecurity legislation. It looked tremendously according like it almost as if they copied NIS2. Very important that we see Europe is trendsetter in the world. More and more continents are raising their resilience against hackers. Very important.
The Géant network is funded by the European Union.
Yes.
It's an academic research network to encourage collaboration across Europe. Why is it so important that the European Union funds such projects like the Géant network?
Well, the entire existence of the internet is because of DARPA, and DARPA started between universities building networks in order for flowing of data.
What is DARPA?
Well, DARPA was a Pentagon, Department of Defense in the US project in the 70s, making sure universities were connected with one another. That's how the internet started, you know? Things can grow from there. And the European equivalent now with high-speed internet is of course Géant. It's very much alike, but it's more advanced than DARPA was at that time. Very important.
Can you explain the wider benefit of academic research networks such as the Géant network?
Sure. Nearly all scientific research focuses on data. It's transformative for society but also for academic research. Big data solutions and big data exchanges between scientists are more important than ever. If you have a network with which you can exchange, we make sure that Europe grows and we can compete with blocks like China and America. So this is a prerequisite, a fundamental prerequisite for excellence in science.
Can you tell us more about your personal job? What are the big challenges that you face?
Speaking many different languages, but also traveling back and forth to Brussels, like here in Brussels. But what is very important is that you make sure that you have impact on your own turf. And that is important to make sure that you're really, really into the substance of the matter, that you know your files, you know your dossiers. Then you convince people in Brussels. It's 90% substance, 10% politics. It's very important that you cover, you know what you're talking about.
How many languages do you speak?
All right, I speak Dutch, French, German, but also a local language.
What do you love most about your job?
Well, you know, it's about if I do politics here, like say in my home country, people read different newspapers, right? And we discuss the news. But I'm in Brussels. People discuss newspapers from all over the world. And if you're a former Habsburg country, you're a former Soviet state, or you're Northwestern European or Southwest, everyone views the same news very differently. So I learn that the Netherlands is unfortunately not the center of the world. I tend to think it is, but it's not. And it's very important that Brussels brings together all those countries, those views. It's a peace project, in essence.
Do you have any hopes and dreams?
Without hope, everything's lost. I have all the hope in the world, and we know everything eventually will become better. And my biggest dream is that not just prosperity and stability and safety, but it's also that people are more thankful for what we already have achieved. There's so many things to be grateful for. Not just this beautiful weather or the beautiful atmosphere we're in, but it's also the things we have, prosperity, peace, and that's not a coincidence. It's really a force of politics and political will.
Do you think there's a lot or too much negativity and mistrust in these digital systems?
I do, and I think if you would ask any citizens here in Brussels, you would ask, is there more or less hate and distrust between people now or 20 years ago? I say there's more. And why? Because digital networks, especially social media, have really enhanced the negativity. And I think that misinformation, more important, disinformation, and even on top of that, malign foreign interference is a real big threat. In Brussels, I invest a lot of time in making sure we protect ourselves much better against it. The trust in our democratic institutions, the trust in people amongst each other is one of the biggest gifts we have in Western Europe.
What would you say to young students or young aspiring professionals who want to get into the world of the digital realm across Europe?
It's the best thing you can do. The best investment is to get into tech. I did it as well, and it was the best investment I did. Now I'm in politics, and I want to make sure that everyone getting into tech is really happy with the legislation I make, because if the community is enabled, the society as such prospers. It's really about the tech community bringing us forward and doing it with human-centric, making sure we get good legislation, that the right tech comes here in Europe. It's our tech with our conditions. We make our own laws. We have the future, and it's ours to take, and not for China, the US, or anyone else. The European future is ours.
I'm 24 now. When you were 24, did you imagine you'd be where you are now?
No, I never imagined I got into politics. I never wanted, and I always was very reluctant, and I refused a couple of times. But eventually they said, you have fire, you have drive, and I know that anything that you think that now is not functioning well in the digital realm, you can also make sure that you have a positive energy and a positive outcome. That's what politics is for. Saying, I am frustrated that we see hackers hacking into our vital infrastructure, not doing anything about it. Well, get into politics, make laws that actually make Russia, China and criminals pay for their behavior. That's my main drive, and I love it.
If you had one last message for anyone watching this video, what would it be?
The best thing we can do is make sure that we're grateful for the peace and prosperity we have now. Looking at history, peace is absolutely something which is not normal. And now we have it, keep it. And the way we keep it is to build strong defenses, but also strong cooperation in Europe with like-minded countries across the world. And we can build that future better, to make sure that children have a better future than we have.
Bart, thank you so much for your time today. It was an honor meeting you.
Honor meeting you.